Hello there guys. We are back on the ground today after quite a few aircraft videos from me recently. Here we have the Dragon 1/35th scale Jeep as used by the SAS in Europe. Of course the SAS's use of the Jeep is perhaps most famous in North Africa, but they did make use of it in Europe too. And really this build was inspired by a video from Workbench Hobbies recently where he looked at Dragon kits and how they compare essentially to modern kits. And that video really got me thinking because I've built a few Dragon kits in the past and I've got a few more in the stash, but it's been a while since I've made any. In fact, I don't think I've made any for the channel. I always think of Dragon kits as having interesting instructions but being quite good for subjects which are uncommon, and I think this SAS Jeep is a good example of that. This Jeep was originally tooled in 2011, but the European theatre release is a 2013 release. The version that I have here includes 4 SAS figures, which is basically this set here, included with the kit. That's quite a nice inclusion, given that the price is $17.99. The only slight downside there is that none of these figures are seated, so I'll have to figure out how to creatively use them with the Jeep. Let's start by looking inside the box, and if you've built any Dragon kit before, you'll be familiar with this sort of blue and white instruction manual. To me this is always reminiscent of really old comic books, and I feel like it makes the Dragon kits look a lot older than they really are. What you'll also notice is the sprue map on the front page, and a very common feature of Dragon kits, which is a large number of the parts are marked as not in use. Actually the number of unused parts on this kit is comparatively small. And then it's a fairly familiar style inside for anyone who's made a model kit before. Dragon kits do often feature photo etch, even for small kits like this. And another characteristic which we'll see during the build is that they tend to have a lot of parts detailed which will later be hidden. So for example in this kit the engine. So we start by building the wheels and then the chassis. And you do tend to get your money's worth in terms of the number of parts here. So you can see the front wheels are made out of 3 parts and the rear wheels are made out of 4 parts each, whereas other manufacturers might prefer to have a smaller number of parts. In fact, adding the commentary to this video, I've only just noticed that step in the centre there, where we're supposed to carve off the carry handle there for the fuel can and replace it with a photo etch alternative. I didn't do that, I completely missed that until just now. We build some of the suspension detail, which, although not entirely visible, will be noticeable I think if it's not there on the final model. The only issue I had here really was the lack of location pins. It took me a few dry fits and a few different orientations there to get this in the right place. The best approach I found for sub-assemblies like this was to build them up and then when the glue was still not dried, to fit them onto the chassis so that I knew everything was aligned. And you can see there, although it was a little bit of a chore, there is a good level of detail there on that chassis. And I like to think that some of it will be noticeable, at least in silhouette, from the side. Interestingly, there's quite a lot less work to do on the top of the vehicle, with the majority of the body moulded as one piece. We do get this front grille here, and that's got those bars cut away which we do see in some of the reference photos. Photo etch is used for the stowage racks on the front, and there are no plastic alternative parts. I really do need to get myself a photo etch bender. Bending things here on the edge of a blade or a steel ruler is not the best way to go about things. I sort of got away with it here because I imagine that these stowage racks would be a bit damaged and bent anyway. But if you wanted nice, crisp, clean edges, this is not the way to do things. You can see here the mess I've made of that front rack. I did build up the engine detail, although I am going to have the bonnet, the hood closed, so none of it will be seen from the top or from the front. We do have this sort of armour protection piece for the front grille and radiator, but we only have it in this position here with the slats closed, so I decided to leave it off completely, and on many reference photos we don't see it anyway. The controls are nicely detailed with 2 pedals and 3 gear levers. I believe one is for the gears, one is to switch between 4-wheel and 2-wheel drive mode, and one is to switch between high and low range, I think, if I've got that correct. I made sure that the instrument panel would fit okay, but I left it separately for detail painting and decals. Here you can see all the parts after they've had a good prime, including the figures. I'm not going to focus on the figures in this video. I have built them, as you can see, and I will be painting them and including them on a small base in an upcoming video. The underside of the main body and the entire chassis were given a base coat of black, plus some pre-shading in the darker areas such as the footwell. Now at this time of the war, late 1944, we expect that British vehicles will be painted in SCC 15. This is the new AK Wheel Colours SCC 15. It's much browner, I think, than the previous variant of that colour, even though AK said they didn't change the formulation. I'm not a huge fan of the colour, but I wanted to try this here because I wanted to see what it would look like if I applied it to my 16th scale Achilles. In terms of painting and marking, we have a couple of options. Overall green here, unidentified SAS unit, 1945. And then 2 more unidentified SAS units, both in 1945, both with the Mickey Mouse camouflage scheme, with slight variations in the size of the black splodges there. I feel like I've done quite a few Mickey Mouse camo schemes in the past, and therefore I decided just to stick with an overall olive drab. I also feel that if we look at the reference images, most of those seem to be in a flat olive drab from what I can tell. But one characteristic feature of them is that they are very heavily laden. There's lots of spare tyres, ration boxes, extra ammunition, and so on. And that is the kind of look that I want to reproduce. You'll notice that on all of those 3 options, none of them really have any markings, except the second one, which has a serial number on the bonnet. The decal sheet does contain quite a lot more than that. We get numbers which allow us to make any serial number we want, more or less, as long as there are no duplicate digits. And we get the SAS badge, which is what I'm going for. First of all though, I put on the instrument decals. This includes various placards and things, explaining how the transmission works and so on. The liquid I'm using there is Tamiya Markfit. I wanted a bit more visual interest though, so I found an Allied Star in the stash of old decals. It broke up a little bit when I was applying it, but it's all good. And I do straighten that out as well. And the winged dagger insignia on the rear. All of the weapons, and this Jeep has a lot of them, were base painted in black and then given a heavy dry brushing of X10 gunmetal. So we've got twin machine guns on the front on the right hand side. This is to a left hand drive vehicle. We've got a single machine gun on the driver's side, the left, and we've got twin machine guns on the rear. One feature of the SAS Jeep in Europe, which I didn't see in the North Africa version, is these 2 fuel tanks. You'll see reference photos with and without them, but I thought since it's something unique to the European Jeep, I would include them. Then it was time to start the weathering. This is my go-to acrylic paste. It's the AK Interactive Light Earth. I've thinned it slightly with water here, and I'm applying it to the underside of the vehicle, in particular into the wheel wells, the wheel arches. I'm applying this here for the texture, not for the colour. Once that was dry, I gave it a light coat of XF52 Flat Earth, which you can see there. Then it was time to busy up the Jeep a little bit and add some stowage and so on. The kit does come with 4 British petrol containers, but they're the flimsy kind, which are probably not appropriate, I think, for this stage of the war. So I used a combination of some existing spare jerry cans and some 3D printed ones, painted them in a variety of olive drab and green colours, and weathered them slightly using some sponge chipping with a metallic colour. I also put some of those jerry cans in the rear, including those 4 flimsies. I had a couple of rucksacks and bags hanging around, so I decided to use those too. I really liked the reference image with the ration box on the front bumper, so I 3D printed one of those. I brush painted a base coat of old wood, but in reality it might have been better to airbrush this coat. And then I attempted to add some wood grain using some oil paint. On my first attempt I was using this very dark brown, which when I start to smear it you'll see is just way too dark. So I removed as much of that as I could with some odourless thinner, and I went for a much lighter brown for my second attempt. And I think that looks much better. It doesn't look great still, but it looks okay. I then went back to that initial dark brown for a pin wash, which I used both on the ration box and on the rest of the vehicle. Now one of the techniques that I really like, especially on a vehicle with a single colour, is to do some oil paint splattering. This involves taking the pin wash mixture and just flicking it over the vehicle. I'm not trying to simulate mud being kicked up or anything like that here, just to create a very slight patina, very slight change of colours over the vehicle. And because this oil paint is so thin, only tiny amounts of pigment are actually getting onto the vehicle at this point. It's quite hard to see on camera, but it does break up the uniformity of the paint surface. I didn't have any string which was fine enough to look like rope for this ration box, so I used some thin metal wire instead, painted a light colour so it hopefully looks a little bit like rope. Now the scene I envisage for this Jeep is a hot, dry summer's day, and therefore I didn't want to put any mud on it, but I did want quite a lot of dust. I grabbed this European earth pigment and started on the bottom just to make sure I was happy with controlling the pigment and happy with the colour. I put it on nice and thick on the bottom. You can almost dry brush a pigment sometimes where you just sort of catch it on the edge of a shape and it really highlights those edges and really gives it some depth. I stuck with quite thick pigment for the wheel wells, but then moved to a lighter application on the sides, of course trying to feather it upwards to get lighter towards the top of the vehicle. And hopefully, because this model has a matte coat, that pigment should stick to it. And with that done, my European SAS Jeep was complete. So there we go guys, that was my build of the Dragon SAS Jeep in the European Theatre of Operations 1945. I had great fun with this. Being a relatively short and simple build, it really made me realise just how much I enjoy painting and weathering, and I'm really quite happy with the result there. It's actually been ages since I've used pigments, but I think they've come out pretty well. I'm also a bit happier now with that SCC15 colour once it has been weathered. Personally, I thought this was a great value kit. $17.99 for the Jeep and for 4 figures is really good. Here in the UK, a set of 4 figures will probably cost around, well, probably between £12 and £15 depending on the brand. So I would really consider those to be thrown in for free alongside the Jeep. And here's a quick peek of this Jeep next to my Tamiya Jeep in the SAS Desert colours. So there we go guys, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for watching. Special thanks to my lovely Patreon supporters and YouTube members. Your ongoing support of this channel is massively appreciated, and if you'd like to join either of those schemes you can find some links in the description below. Christmas is inevitably moving ever closer, and I do have a winter build in the pipeline, which my Patreon and YouTube members have seen some of already, and I'll have lots more videos coming up too. Of course it is Scale Model World Telford next weekend, so that should be fun, and I'll try and bring you some content from there too. In the meantime, thank you very much to everyone for watching, and have fun modelling.